He'd long forgotten the shape of a lullaby, and yet, there he stood, Jedediah Coltrane, a man made of gravel and silence, rocking a baby on his splintered porch as the desert wind whispered through the canyon. He hadn't asked for this child, hadn't asked for anything in years. And still, there she was, swaddled in a threadbare blanket, sleeping like the world hadn't turned its back on her. That morning, everything he believed about what could be taken and what might still be given shifted. Cinderbrush was the kind of town that kept its curtains open and its mouths wider. Perched on the lip of the Arizona cliffs, it lay parched and judgmental, breathing dust and gossip. The townsfolk wore their prejudices like Sunday best. They remembered everything. Who'd cheated at poker in '71, who'd married below their station, who'd dared love someone the wrong color. And Jed, a widower of 15 years, had long kept to himself, retreating behind the safety of fences, of routine, of things that couldn't leave. They'd whispered about him for years. That's Coltrane, the horseman with dead eyes. Lost his wife, birthing a ghost. But no one had expected this. Him opening his door at dawn to find a baby at his feet, cooing in the cradle of a pine-woven basket. No letter, no knock, just the soft squeak of leather soles fleeing down the slope and the scent of sage lingering in the air like a second thought. Her skin was copper-hued, her eyes dark as obsidian, her breath warm and milk-sweet. Around her wrist, someone had tied a braided leather band with an Apache sun symbol burned into its bead. The child couldn't be more than 3 weeks old. He looked up. No sign of her mother. Just the crows watching from the fence post and a red cloud blooming on the horizon. He should have left the child with the sheriff, should have taken her into town, but his feet didn't move. His hand, gnarled with time and guilt, lifted the basket. The weight was nothing, but it cracked something in his chest long buried under sand and silence. By the time he walked back into his cabin, the child was crying. By the time she fell asleep, nestled in his late wife's shawl, Jed had already forgotten the logic of solitude. The town found out before noon. Deputy Amos Wills, called Coyote for his tendency to show up where trouble already was, came stumbling into the feed store with wide eyes and half a sandwich hanging from his mouth. "Coltrane's got himself a baby," he barked. "One of them Apache ones. Left right on his porch like a cursed blessing." Within hours, the church ladies clucked their tongues. Miss Luella McGraw, the general store, declared it unnatural. Old preacher Halloran muttered something about divine trials. Even the horses at the livery seemed agitated. But Jed didn't explain himself. He fed the girl warm milk with a spoon and whispered names to her like prayers. Eleanor, June, Abigail, none fit. So he didn't give her one. She already had a name, even if he didn't know it yet. That night, the child woke screaming. Her cries shredded the cabin's silence like claws through cotton. Jed sat in the rocker, his wife's rocker, eyes bleary, hands trembling as he held the child against his chest. His voice cracked as he hummed something old and tuneless, a song he'd once sung to his son, long dead before his first breath. Outside, the wind picked up, sending grains of sand tapping against the windows like fingers asking to be let in. In the shadows, just beyond the edge of his land, a figure watched. She was thin, sickly thin, with braided hair and a face too young to be that hollow. Naeli. She'd carved that name herself once, into the side of a cottonwood tree that no longer stood. She had fled through the desert under stars, ribs bruised from running, heart bruised from choosing. Her tribe had scattered. Soldiers had come. There were too many guns, too many dead, too many reasons to leave. But her baby, her Tahu, her sunlight, had cried and cried. And she'd known he wouldn't survive the journey. Not with her. Not like that. So she found the only place she could think of. Jedediah Coltrane, a man who once gave her water when she was 9 and lost in town. He didn't speak Apache, but his eyes had kindness. He gave her a slice of bread and didn't look at her like she was filth. That was enough. She hadn't expected him to keep the child. Maybe just until she returned. If she returned. She'd made it 2 miles past the canyon when the fever came. She'd hidden in a ravine, eating cactus fruit and rainwater. Now her limbs shook and her vision spun. But her ears, they stayed open for any sign of her son. Back in town, the tension had begun to rot. The sheriff stopped Jed in the street. "You think this ends with diapers and goodwill, Coltrane? She'll come back. They always come back. And when she does, it won't be just her." Jed's reply was a silence that felt heavier than a bullet. The next morning, he found boot tracks around his stable, small ones. He found a single feather tucked under the blanket beside the baby, not windblown, placed. He started leaving the lantern lit. On the fourth night, a horse startled. Jed, rifle in hand, found nothing. But when he stepped into the paddock, he saw her. Nayeli. She was slumped beside the barn wall, half conscious, lips cracked, arm bleeding. She looked at him as if through smoke. "Is he," she rasped, voice more breath than word, "alive?" He lowered the rifle. "He's inside." Then she collapsed. And just like that, the world cracked wide open. Not because she'd returned, but because Jed had never meant to care, and now he did. Because he'd opened the door to a child, and life had stormed in behind her, wild and sacred. The town would soon turn on him. The law would soon come. But in that moment, beneath the moonlit hush of the Arizona night, a broken man carried a desperate woman across his threshold, not to cast her out, but to make room for her too. And the rocking chair creaked once more. She woke to the scent of cedar smoke and horses, her fever broken, but her limbs weak. A sliver of sunlight angled through the barn's loft boards, striping her face in gold and shadow. Beneath a thick wool blanket, Nayeli blinked against the sting of daylight. It was quiet, except for the soft clatter of a pail being set down, the rhythmic brushing of a horse, the deep timbre of a man humming low and without tune. Jed was there, his back turned, sleeves rolled, moving with the slow assurance of someone who'd long since given up on hurry. She watched him in silence, unsure if this was sanctuary or another trap. He knew she was awake. He didn't speak, didn't ask questions. Instead, he held out a chipped tin cup of broth. She took it with shaking fingers. "He's warm. Safe," he said, voice a gravel road comfort. "Sleeping with a fist full of my shirt." Nayeli nodded, but her mouth did not form words. Her throat held more scars than sounds. Over the next days, she did not run. She could have, perhaps, could have vanished into the arroyos, faded like smoke. But her body failed her. So she stayed, mending slowly, stitching together her strength in moments. The warmth of soup, the rustle of wind, the child's soft cooing from the cradle in the main room. Jed built her a cot in the corner of the barn. She noticed he whistled when nervous. He noticed she never touched anything with her right hand, the one burned along the palm. They didn't speak much, but in small gestures, they began to understand one another. Each night, she pressed a hand to the child's back, just to feel his breath rise. And each night, Jed would set out an extra portion of food without comment. But kindness is a delicate thread in a town made of thorns. Miss Luella saw the shadows moving through Jed's windows. Deputy Coyote, wandering near the paddock while chasing a loose mule, spotted Nayeli in the early light, her long braid glinting as she fetched water. By midweek, the town was a pot left on the boil. Preacher Halloran spoke of divine order. A few ranchers sharpened their suspicions. Whispers circled like vultures. "She's a scout," said one, marking the land for a raiding party. "Coltrane's gone soft, taking in some savage and her papoose. She ain't his wife. What's she to him?" Deputy Coyote, God bless his misplaced loyalty, tried to help in his own catastrophic way. He burst into the saloon one night and declared, "Ain't no law against charity. The woman's near starved. Least she's not burning barns or stealing chickens." Of course, in doing so, he confirmed to half the town that she was indeed hiding with Jed. That night, someone threw a stone through Jed's window. The baby cried for hours, inconsolable, and Nayeli sat against the wall, arms around her knees, rocking slowly, as if trying to erase herself into the wood. "You'll have to let her go," said the sheriff the next morning. "Folks are restless. Could spill over into something you can't fix." Jed said nothing. He was carving a tiny horse from driftwood, the knife pausing just long enough to let the sheriff know he'd been heard. It wasn't about stubbornness. It was about something deeper, bone deep, a knowledge that if he let them take her, it wouldn't end there. It never did. That afternoon, Naeli packed her bundle, laid the child down, and whispered something over him, an Apache blessing too soft for Jed to catch. "I should go," she said simply. "I bring danger." Jed's hands twitched at his sides, caught between reaching and retreating. He opened his mouth, closed it. "Finally, he wakes looking for you. Not me. I can't stay where I'm hunted." He nodded, throat tight. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was heavy with all the words neither knew how to give. But destiny has a way of arriving when all roads are blocked. They came at dusk. 3 men, faces veiled with scarves and dust. One bore a U.S. cavalry insignia on his belt. Another had the eyes of someone who'd been paid to do worse. Guns at their hips, they rode up without hurry. Jed was mending a fence post. Naeli stood at the barn door, baby cradled against her chest. The leader spoke first, casual as snakebite. "We've heard tell of a deserter, a woman fleeing federal custody after inciting tribal insurgents. Apache, Finn, carries a scar on her right hand." Jed kept hammering. "We're just doing our duty, mister. She's wanted for questioning, harboring hers obstruction." Naeli stepped forward, spine straight. "I'll go." Jed dropped the hammer. The sound cracked through the air like a shot. "You'll not take her," he said. The man smiled like someone who'd seen too many cowards. "You aiming to make this hard?" Jed walked toward him, calm and terrible. "You're on private land. You've no warrant. You'll leave now, or you'll answer to more than me." The second man drew his weapon, a foolish flick of wrist, and from behind the fence a shout, "Hey! Hey now!" Deputy Coyote stumbled out, holding a flour sack, tripping over his own boot laces. "Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt, just bringing Mr. Coltrane his birdseed." He blinked at the armed strangers. Didn't know it was visitor hour. One of the men hesitated. Just enough. Jed didn't wait. He stepped forward, hand on his own gun, not raised but poised with finality. "This woman is no threat. This child is no soldier. You got no cause here but cruelty. So I'll ask you kindly right on." The tension cracked like lightning. Then, without a word, the riders turned, spurred their horses, rode off into the dying light. Jed exhaled. Coyote grinned. "See? Told you birdseed saves lives." As night fell, Jed found Naeli outside, eyes lost in the stars. "I can't pay you back," she whispered. "I don't want paying," he said. She turned to him. For the first time, her fingers brushed his wrist. And in that quiet contact, skin to skin, not urgent, not claim, something bloomed. Not love, not yet, but the courage that could one day become it. Morning cracked open like a promise wrapped in fire. The desert spilled its colors across the sky, rose and ochre bleeding into cobalt. And the baby laughed, one small fist grabbing at the light through the cabin's dusty window. Jed stood with his palm resting on the doorframe, watching the sun rise over the canyon and listening to the sounds of a new day. A kettle boiling, a woman humming softly, the rhythmic creak of the rocker. For a moment, he allowed the illusion of permanence. But peace never came to stay. It was a thing you borrowed, never owned. The sheriff returned just past noon, not alone. 2 federal men rode at his side, stiff-backed, brass-buttoned, faces scrubbed of mercy. They carried the kind of paper that gave them power, signed with ink that outlived conscience. Naeli stood in the yard, a bundle of clean linens in her arms. When she saw the riders, her body tensed, an old reflex born of raids and cages and too many nights running beneath unfriendly moons. Jed stepped between her and the law. His voice, when it came, was slow and quiet, like distant thunder. "What's this?" The elder of the 2 agents dismounted with the kind of ceremony reserved for men who believe in their own authority. "She's listed on a military detainment ledger," he said, unfolding a folded, official-looking parchment. "Suspected involvement with rebel Apache factions. Failure to report during disbandment. Harboring an unauthorized child born on reservation territory." "She's a mother," Jed said. The man barely blinked. "She's a fugitive." The sheriff, though quieter than usual, shifted in his saddle, gaze flicking toward the house. "They don't want a trial. Just want her relocated. Fort Sumner." Naeli's knuckles turned white around the linen. Jed said nothing, but something in his stillness made the agent flinch. "You step aside, sir, or you'll be charged with obstruction." Coyote appeared then, from behind the barn, wearing mismatched boots, half covered in dust, but with eyes sharp as barbed wire. "You sure about that?" he called, holding up a crumpled envelope. "Got a telegraph here, just came this morning. Sent from Fort Whipple. Says Miss Naeli's record was scrubbed after the treaty last spring. She's listed as decommissioned with no legal obligations." The agent strode over, snatched the envelope, scanned it. This isn't signed." "Still official," Coyote replied, puffing up like a rooster in a storm. "Came through the station. You remove her now, you'll be the one answering to D.C." Silence. The wind picked up, scattering sand across their boots. The younger agent turned, uneasy. The sheriff cleared his throat, but didn't speak. The agent held Naeli's gaze for one long moment. Then he folded the paper, shoved it into his jacket, and said, "You're lucky." To Jed, "You're a fool." As they mounted and rode away, the town's illusion of order seemed to fade behind them like wagon smoke. Naeli sat on the porch, hands trembling in her lap. The baby lay asleep across her thighs, his breath slow and sure. Jed joined her, not speaking. He placed a tin cup of water beside her and then, after a pause, sat beside her. Not too close. Not far. She broke the silence. "I was ready to go. I know. You could have let me. I couldn't." The baby stirred. Naeli looked down at him, and her voice became almost inaudible. "They tried to take him once before. My own people. Said he'd bring death, that his birth was cursed with soldiers and smoke. I ran because I believed them." Jed looked out across the mesa, where dust curled into spirals and hawks floated high in the heat shimmer. "My wife died bringing our son into the world," he said after a moment. He never drew a breath. "I built his cradle with my own hands, and I never got to hear it rock." Naeli turned to him, her eyes wet but fierce. "You think this is redemption?" "I think this is life," he said. "Not what we wanted, but maybe what we've got left." That night, Cinder Brush buzzed with rumors. Some said Coltrane had stared down the army. Others claimed the Apache girl had bewitched him with spells and tears. Miss Luella declared it ungodly. The preacher muttered about temptation and prophecy. But when Naeli walked through town the next day, she held her child high on her hip and her chin higher still. She walked past the church, past the mercantile, past the blacksmith who tipped his hat in reluctant respect. Jed walked beside her, not shielding, just there, a presence. They said nothing to the gossips. They didn't need to. Spring crept in that year like a hymn. Wildflowers pushed through the cracks in the canyon. Rain came slow but steady. Jed taught Naeli to ride his wife's mare. She showed him how to braid the baby's hair as he grew and how to stitch medicine bundles into the hems of shirts for protection. Slowly, gently, time began to soften what had once been stone. Coyote visited often, always bringing something absurd. A crooked pie, a broken mandolin, once even a parrot that cursed in Spanish. He never stayed long, just enough to make them laugh and leave footprints in the dust. One evening, as twilight bled violet over the mesas, Jed reached for Naeli's hand as they sat beside the fire. She didn't flinch this time. She let him. "I'll stay," she said softly. "Not for safety, but because this," she looked toward the child, now asleep with his toy horse tucked beneath one arm. "This feels like truth." Jed nodded, the lines in his face softening in the glow. "We build slow here, but we build strong." And so it was. In a place that had once judged them, they carved something no law could name. A belonging forged not of blood or names, but of shared wounds and choice and kindness. And when you pass through Cinderbrush now, if you listen close in the hush of evening, you might hear the creak of a rocking chair and the laughter of a child named Toe, whose name means sunlight, and who grew up between two worlds that once warred but now rested, for a time, in peace. Let this tale remind you, what the world casts out, love can still gather. What begins in fear may yet end in grace.